Hi everyone, and welcome to today's episode. And today I'm talking to the poet and literary writer Rhonda Douglas. And in today's episode, she talks to us about how she got started in her writing journey, how she approached publishers, and it's really interesting how she does it. She's been very methodical. Then she talks to us about the benefits of community and how important finding a writing community can be to your writing journey. And then, of course, we talk about the 4-folder method, which is a wonderfully simple way of organising all your materials so that you know where everything is and you don't get overwhelmed by it. So find out how Rhonda Douglas can help you. Welcome to the Turning Readers into Writers podcast, where we teach beginner writers how to find the time and the confidence to write their first novel. I'm your host, Emma Desi, and I'm very excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, because if you've been longing to write your novel for forever, then this is the place to be. Think of this as your weekly dose of encouragement, of hand-holding and general cheerleading as you figure out how you're going to write your first novel. Trust me, as a mum of 3 young kids, I know how tricky it can be to tuck some time aside for yourself on a regular basis. And even when you do find that spare 5 minutes, you can feel so overwhelmed that no writing gets done. Trust me, I have been there, but this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because once a week I'll be delivering an episode that gives you steps to building a writing routine, encouragement to build your confidence, and cheerleading until you reach the end. Okay, let's start. Hi everybody, and welcome to today's interview, I'm really excited about this one. I'm talking to a lady called Rhonda Douglas, who is an award-winning writer based from Canada. Rhonda Douglas helps writers finish their books and create a winning writing life they love. She was, until recently, the poetry editor for Arc Poetry, which is Canada's national poetry magazine. And as I say, she's an award-winning poet and fiction writer based in Ottawa in Canada. She is the author of 2 books, Some Days I Think I Know Things, the Cassandra poems, and also Welcome to the Circus. And welcome to you, Rhonda.
Thank you, Emma.
How are you today?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, how are you doing?
Very well, very well.
Good.
I wonder if you could just start off by telling us a little bit about how you became a writer. Was it something that you'd always wanted to do, or were you like me perhaps and came to it a little bit later in life?
Right. Well, this sort of, I suppose, a version of this story that is, from my childhood. I can remember writing an exercise in class. I think it was a little paragraph about my brother, and I got, one of those sticky gold stars, and my mom has kept it in a scrapbook. And, so from very early on, I knew that writing was something I enjoyed. And I had just, journal after journal, through my teenage years, wrote some very bad poetry. So early on, but I think I didn't actually decide that it was something I really wanted to get serious about until I was in my 20s. And then I started taking, community workshops mostly. And then after that, just sort of progressively taking more and more workshops. It really works for me to have feedback and a deadline. It's something I just love as a writer, right? Feedback and a deadline. That'll get me going. So I did a lot of that in my 20s, and then eventually even did a graduate certificate in creative writing, and then I did my Master's of Fine Arts at the University of British Columbia. So it was really progressive, I'd always been an avid, possibly obsessive reader, always reading all the time and always journaling and writing. But it wasn't until I reached out and kind of found myself some workshops, some training, and some community with other writers that I really took it seriously and finally was able to publish.
And did you find that community solely online, or were you able to find a community in the area that you lived as well, sort of in real life?
Yeah, it started in real life I'm based in Ottawa, Canada, and there's a really lovely kind of literary community people are very supportive of each other, and so it was all in real life at first. And again, meeting people, going out to poetry readings, mostly just listening at first, and then eventually, you sort of tentatively try the open mic if you're a poet. And then for fiction, it was, I did some university courses and met people that way, and just kind of made friends and got drawn into different circles. And then I think this was quite late on, but in my 30s, I got accepted to the Banff Center in Western Canada for like a full 5-week program. And there were a couple of people from my local area who also, I hadn't met them before, but we just were suddenly there together. And they invited me to join their writing group. So for, must be 15 years now, I've had a writing group that meets regularly. And so that's really just a powerful form of community, And again, super supportive people. I just don't even know. I don't think I would have kept going without community. I really think it's important.
Mm-hmm. That's so special when you do find a group of people who you click with just like that, and you know that even if you're not writing the same sort of work, but you have a respect for one another, you have the same kind of work ethic. I think it's really special. I think it's hard to find as well. So I'm really envious that you've managed to find that.
It is hard to find. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely hard to find. Yeah.
So you've had your group, and for 15 years you guys have been together. And did they help you put together, for example, your first book of poetry, Some Days I Think I Know Things, the Cassandra poems?
That one, yes, I think we used to. So this was a friend. The friend that invited me to join that group was really instrumental in that. So she and I used to do with another friend that would occasionally come in. We used to do it yourself writing retreats. So, everyone would love to sort of go off to this big, retreat center and pay a couple $1,000s and be away for a couple of weeks and have someone make your bed and bring you lunch. Gosh, that sounds great. I'd like to do it right now. But, it's just not always possible. And I was always working a full-time job. And for a long time, I was a single mother. And so I had to really get creative about how I could find the time to write. So we used to do these DIY writing retreats. We'd book a long weekend and find like a cabin or a cottage or even sometimes like a little bed and breakfast. And we had sort of a structure. It involved a lot of napping and reading, and then a lot of writing. And I remember this one place we used to go to was run by a group of nuns, and it was a silent retreat. And so we would be silent for that period, working on our things. And then Saturday night we would sneak out to the local restaurant in order to have a glass of wine and talk about what we've been writing. And so most of that first book, Some Days I Think I Know Things, the Cassandra poems, were written that way at these retreats. And then she also helped me organize it. So, often it's especially when you're writing your first book of poems, you don't quite know how it's all going to come together for the best effect. Mm-hmm. And so I remember at one retreat, it was a big living room. We just printed the pages and put them all on the floor and moved them around, So, yeah, it was really, community's been really instrumental to me over the years.
And you mentioned before we came on air, you mentioned that you had opted to go the traditional route. And I know that some of my listeners will be very interested to hear your process, how that worked for you, and then how you got that deal.
Right. So I have 2 published books at the moment. So one is a book of poetry. I've got another one finished, but not out yet. And then I have a book of short stories. And so the process was very different. The first process was over years of having worked with, different writers. You kind of get to know, writers talk about publishing a lot, right? And so you get to know who's who and what's going on. And it was one of those stories that maybe it's maybe not the best example. So I was working with someone, I'd signed up for a course, and the woman I was working with on these poems was a bit of a, I wouldn't say recluse exactly, but she didn't go out to a lot of parties. And so one weekend she did. She went out to a party where there were some other poets, and a poet from the west coast of Canada happened to be in town and was at this party and mentioned to her that he had just become the editor for this publishing house. And was going to be looking for poetry manuscripts. And so she said, I've got one for you, and got me to send it to him, and they took it. So that's sort of the easiest way I think to do it, but a little hard to replicate that way.
But I think that emphasizes really well the power, as you were saying before, the power of the community, and how just talking, we're writers quite often, we're quite introverted, but the power of talking to people is so strong, and it shouldn't be underestimated. And so thank goodness your friend went to that party.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank goodness she did. And she was such a generous mentor as well, in terms of, her feedback and the time she gave and so on. So I think, but for the second book, it was a little different. And I knew it was a book of short stories. So I knew I was going to be going with a literary press, a smaller literary press. You can get, and in fact, some of the folks out of my MFA program, you can get a deal where it's a 2-book deal with a publisher, and the first book is a short story collection, and then the second one is a novel or a memoir, because a short story collection is really hard to sell. They just don't sell as many of them as we do novels, memoir, nonfiction, which is a shame. I love short stories, love them. But that's just the reality of book marketing. Mm-hmm. So I knew I was going to be working with a literary press who loved short stories themselves. I really wanted a really positive experience. I wanted a publisher who produced books that were beautiful, that were lovely objects as well, because I'm just such a book lover, and that was really important to me. So I did a lot of research. I looked on my own shelf because I was reading, especially when I was writing short stories and putting that book together. I'm always reading in the genre that I'm writing. So I was, I knew and had books on my shelf of publishers publishing short stories, like so many. It was a bit of a problem. I remember my accountant that year saying, do you think you could cut back on your book buying just a little bit? Nope. So I looked at all of those books. I literally took them off my shelf and had them in a pile on the couch. And one by one, I was looking at who published it, who was the editor, what was the quality of the book, what did I love about it? And I would think about, like, when that book came out, had I seen much publicity about it? How hard had it been for me to get the book? Because there are sometimes publishers at least in Canada anyway, who do beautiful books, but we're such a large country that sometimes you can be a little regionally stuck. Yeah. So someone in the west coast of the country finds it hard to find your book if you're published in the east coast of the country. Oh, okay. So I wanted a publisher who I knew had good national distribution as well. So from that, I made a short list. I made a really big list of all the publishers. I went online and I researched, like, who was the Canada Council for the Arts funding, and who were the publishers whose books of short stories had been nominated for awards. All of that. I asked my friends. I did as much research as I could, and I came up with a big, long list. I think in the end there were about 15 publishers in my sort of first round where I would have been, like, delighted to publish with. Mm-hmm. That wasn't like every publisher in the country, but that did short stories, but the ones that I liked and loved. And so I decided to take them in sections. And so I sent out 4 at a time. And there's some publishers I still have never heard from to this day. And I got a rejection, and it hurt. Like it was a rejection that just stung. And then I got a rejection that was really lovely. When I started reading the letter, I was so excited. It was an email. And I was so excited because they sound like they loved it so much. And then they said, oh, unfortunately, their list was full and they couldn't take it. And then I got an acceptance. And they were so excited. They were so excited to publish my book. And then the editor that I worked with was absolutely just adoring of my characters and the stories. And it was such a great experience. Their name is Freehand Press out in the West Coast here, based in Calgary. And they did a fantastic job. They, sent it out, so it got reviewed. It got shortlisted for awards. They just really got it out there and did a lot of great work. Yeah.
That sounds amazing. That sounds like a kind of a dream come true, sort of one of those typical kind of unicorn ones. You sent out your first submissions. You've been through the nasty rejection. You've been through the nice rejection, and then you got the lovely acceptance. So that's amazing. But I love how strategic you were there, and I think that really illustrates the importance of knowing your genre, knowing who publishes in your genre, and doing your research beforehand. A lot of people, recommend that you read in your genre, but I guess I think this shows as well that if you want to publish traditionally, it's as good to know who publishes in that genre, and that's their speciality. Because then, as you say, they're going to do their best for you.
Yeah, and there is also there's so much information in those acknowledgement pages, right? So I think we don't even, as readers, we kind of skip over them. But in there, they're thanking their publisher and saying, what a pleasure it was to work with them. Or sometimes they're not saying that, and they're naming their editor, and similarly, and talking about other people they've worked with. And so I did, over a series of years, really pay a lot of attention. I subscribed to a magazine. It's called Quill and Quire, and it's a magazine about the book industry in Canada. So I was also, for a couple of years, knowing that I was going to want to publish the book. I published individual short stories in magazines, and some of them had won awards. And so I knew I had a book that probably could find a traditional publisher. And it was just at that point, girding your loins and steeling yourself and being willing to put it out there. So, yeah.
Oh, well, good for you. It's lovely. It's a nice story. I'm really pleased.
I'm so happy it turned out.
I am conscious that I also wanted to talk to you because I'm on your mailing list, and you kindly send out your regular newsletter, and you sent us some information about the 4-folder method, which really intrigued me, and I thought was a great one. I love simplicity, so this was a really nice, easy, or simple method anyway of storing and using your information. So I wondered if you'd tell us a little bit more about it and how that works.
Sure. So this came about, it's something I use in my first book finish program. And so that's a program that helps people finish their first books. And so I really was thinking about, what are the things that get us stuck? What gets in the way? Why is it? What are all the very particular and specific little ways that writers trip ourselves up when we're trying to finish a book? And so this system, this 4-folder system, is what I suggest to my students, and it has a couple of benefits. One of them is definitely the simplicity. I mean, you've really put your finger on it there. That's what it's about. It also helps us structure our thinking. So what we tend to do is sometimes we just get overwhelmed with our own thinking. We think, I've got to fix that character, and I've got to, the setting, and I better do some more research. And okay, now I've been writing this book for 3 months, and now I've got 2 more ideas for 2 more novels, and, maybe I should go write those. I don't know. And we get kind of anxious and caught up in our anxious thoughts. And so this is particularly, the system is for that. There's a lot of work in the first book finish program around calming writer anxiety. And so a simple system helps to do that. So there are 4 folders. And when I say folders, I'm meaning both paper and electronic. These days, I actually love paper folders. And so I use them as much as I can. I'm a real sort of stationary geek that way. And I like pretty ones. Yeah. So, but these days, of course, and particularly, even if you write from hand, eventually you're going to end up typing on the computer. So I also recommend a mirrored digital system. And it doesn't matter whether something is paper or digital or both, however you want to work. So the 4 folders in that system are draft, research, reading, and random. So let me go through for you just what they are. The first one is draft. So that's the folder in which you're keeping your draft, right? So if you're printing it out and you're writing notes, you put it in that folder. If you are writing chapters or sections or pulling together a book of poetry, you'd have individual poems, but they're all in a folder called draft so that they're not everywhere. Right? One of the things that often happens when writers first start to write a book is they have pieces of it in this notebook and that notebook, and they've typed up a little bit on the computer. And so the first thing we do is let's pull that all together into one folder. That's your draft. The second one is research. And, I am a writer who prefers, and when I work with writers, I advise them to do just enough research, just enough to get you started. And this folder is for the research that you're going to be collecting. So in my case, my current novel is based in London in the 1880s. So I've got a map, right? Because I need to know, wait a minute, where was Mayfair? What if I've got somebody in a park? Did that park exist? Wait. So, that kind of thing is in your research folder. You might have notes on setting. You might have postcards. You might have photos. Anything that you've got, you're sticking it all in there.
Would you
and then I also...
Sorry. Would you include like character profiles and things in there as well, or would that be your draft?
I would put that in my draft folder. Yeah, I would put that in my draft folder. And anything because with a character profile, you might end up using a little bit of that here and there, right? Mm-hmm. Particularly if, you're writing along and you get a little gem, you wouldn't want to lose that. So I would put it in the draft.
Okay.
But let's see. So it might be a magazine article, might be, really, really anything. I did have for a while, I was working on a book and I had, or a story rather, and I had these historical postcards of the location. And when I was trying to write something that involved the setting, I would pull that out and have a look at it. Mm-hmm. So that kind of thing. But the other thing with research is I want to have a folder because I want to also metaphorically contain it.
Right. Okay. Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yes.
Yeah. Because don't you find, I think people often go off and, research. If I tell myself I need to do more research, it's a way I can use to avoid the writing.
Yes, very much so. It's a really useful procrastination tool, isn't it? We can tell ourselves, we're still working, but actually we're not getting any words down, and we're just, as you say, avoiding.
Yeah. And next thing you know, it's 45 minutes later and you're down a little internet rabbit hole, right?
Yes.
So I'm trying to contain it. And I also tell my students to use what I call the square bracket method, which is, so at one point I was working on a scene that required describing surgical instruments from the late 1800s. So I'm writing along and then I go square bracket, find that instrument that does XYZ, and square bracket, keep writing. And then I go back and I know I'm researching something particular, not just all the things.
Yes.
So that's what I
would have for you would be when you're researching your book, because you're doing historical. So do you say to yourself, perhaps, okay, I'm going to give myself 2 weeks to do all the research I need to for this book and then move on? Or are you a little bit more kind of fluid than that?
I like to do a bunch of research at the start and to give it a fixed time. So the 2 weeks or a month or, however long you want to give it. And then I do a kind of immersion, and I get it all down and I take notes and I really feel like I am beginning to know something, particularly with anything kind of technical or historical. Of course, you will never know everything, and you don't need to, right? But I think we get, it's a place, again, where we invest some of our anxiety. We feel we need to know more than we actually do.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a bunch up front. Then I let it go for the entire period of writing the first draft, and I put in square brackets.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go back and I use my square brackets as a research list.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
All
that
the
makes
stuff
total
is in
sense.
square brackets. Now I've got a task list
Mm-hmm.
to go find that. So that's the second folder is research. So we have the draft and the research. The third one is reading. And this is partly a folder and it's also a list. So here's where I want you to put reading that inspires you. So for me, there's a Zadie Smith essay I love. There's some poetry, and I keep that in a folder that I read and refer to. But I also advise people to have two kinds of lists of books while they're working on a book length project. And your first set of books is craft, right? So maybe you need a book on writing better scenes, if that's something you're working on. Maybe you need a book on crafting, writing historical mysteries. I've got one like that right now. So a small set of craft books,
Mm-hmm.
in case you get a little bit stuck and you just want to dive in and get some inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other list is I want people to have a list of books that are inspirational for the project they're working on right now.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. Would it be just kind of general reading that you love or specific to the project at hand? So specific.
Yeah, specific to the project at hand. So, for example, I'm working with a student right now who's working on a multi-generational epic novel. And so she's got to go and find multi-generational epic novels, right?
Uh-huh.
And hers is also historical because it's multi-generational. So, so then she's got to go and find, and she's got different points of view. Her book is told from different points of view. So then in addition to that, she could also find even a contemporary novel where they alternate points of view.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's good. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Just for some inspiration and to know that I think it's important for writers to know that you're not the first writer to trip up against a problem.
Yes.
Right?
One of the things I worry, though, about for myself when I'm reading something that is similar to what I'm working on is I do worry about taking on the voice of the other work I'm reading, particularly if I'm really, really enjoying it. So, for example, I know I cannot read any Kate Atkinson whilst I'm writing a first draft because I love her work so much that even though we write in very different genres, I find myself trying to imitate her unconsciously, and then I have to go back and take it all out. Is that something that you ever have encountered, or your students have? And what might be a way that we could get around that?
I think you have to know yourself. It's not something I experience, but for sure students of mine do. And so then so if that was me, then I wouldn't have Kate Atkinson on my project list. I'd go looking for books other than Kate Atkinson. And then also I would have several, not just one and not just, several by one author, but to have a wide range so that, any given day, because the book is such a long project, I might be reading one author for a week, but then I'm done and I'm in with the next. And then the other thing is, if you find that you ended up, let's say you were reading Kate Atkinson and working on that chapter, and that chapter begins to sound a little less Emma and a little more Kate, it's something you can clean up in the editing phase of the book as well.
Okay,
So we don't have to worry about it too much, particularly in the first draft stages, because in the first draft stages, you don't even know really if what you're writing today is going to make it to the final book.
that's true. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, you're right. I hadn't thought about
You
it
don't
like
have to
that.
worry about it too much.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Glad.
So we've got those first three folders: draft, research, and reading, and then we've got the random. What do you put in the random folder?
Yes. So random is the final one. And this is to solve that problem of the shiny new object. So people often say to me, okay, well, I want to finish this book. I've been working on it for years, and I can't finish it because if I block out some time and I really start working on it, suddenly I have 8 new ideas for new things I want to write, and I go off and I do one of those instead. And so I have all these projects started, but none finished. And it's a real problem. If you're a writer for whom that happens, then what you need to know is that that is anxiety. That is your brain worried about the possibility of failure, and the fear around that kicks in. And so you can go off and start something new, and it's got that fresh, you haven't yet encountered the problems with that shiny new idea. And so it's not as fearful for you. So it's super important for writers who have a history like that. It is even more important that they finish one book in order to teach themselves that they are a writer who finishes.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
so many writers don't finish. And that's actually why I created the whole First Book Finish program, because I came out of my MFA and writers who were more talented than me, frankly, still have not finished their books. And I just think it's such a shame. And there's always lots of reasons, but part of it is really writing, the creative anxiety that writers go through, which is completely natural, but we just need ways to manage it. So that random folder is really for those shiny new ideas. While you write them on a Post-it note, right, like this. You just scroll it down, and then you put it in your random folder, and you're going to come back to it after you finish the first draft of this book.
It's such a great idea, because then it's there, you can't forget it. The idea is there, but you can carry on. And it is so, I agree entirely, like from my own experience as well. Just when I started writing properly, with real intention, it was just to finish that first draft, because I've talked about it for so long, never managed to do it. And I kind of told myself, if I finish this first draft, then I've tried it. And after that, I can decide, okay, did I enjoy it and I want to carry on? Or can I say, no, actually, it turns out this isn't for me, and I'm going to move on to something new. But it's a huge mindset shift when you do finish that first draft, and suddenly you realize, I can do this. This is incredible.
I can do this. Absolutely. And so many writers deprive themselves of that incredible confidence boost that really will drive the rest of their writing careers if they can just finish that one project.
Yeah, so important. So if you're listening and you have shiny penny syndrome, then please do get yourself a random folder.
You need a random folder.
It away. Now, you've mentioned your program. So I know that you do a course for beginner writers, but you also do one-on-one coaching as well. And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that.
I do, yeah. I do a little less of that, but I do. I can't not do it because I love it so much. So it tends to be by application only. And this is where I'm either working with, so I have one student or client I work with who sends me she's finishing a collection of short stories. So we work on one short story at a time, and it's just fantastic. I have other folks I work with who are working on novels. So right now, one of my students, for example, I've got 3 one-on-one clients like that at the moment. Those are big projects when they're working on novels, and it takes a lot of time and attention, emotional energy. And so I have to limit the number of clients I can take for that, because you're reading 400 pages several times, meeting with several times, reviewing revisions and so on. But I love it. So that tends to come either I've got 2 students right now who went through my First Book Finish finish their drafts. And so now they've sent me their drafts to review. And so I'm reading the whole book, but I also have a student who is writing her book in sections. She's got 4 sections, and she's sending me one section at a time. I don't take many like that. I've taken, I generally would discourage it because of this tendency not to finish. But she's finished other books, and so I'm not too worried about it.
And do you, because you're a literary writer yourself, do you, when students apply to you, do you work with genre fiction as well, or do you prefer to do the short story, poetry, and literary fiction?
I do some work with genre. If it's a genre I've worked in myself, so I'm currently working on a mystery that has a romance subplot. So I'm familiar with and have studied the conventions of the genre. I would not take a client who's working in fantasy or science fiction, or I don't know, cowboy, or anything like that, because it's not. I want to be able to give my absolute best to my students, and for that means not only that I've studied it, but that I've worked with it myself, so I know the ins and outs and the challenges and how to overcome them from a experienced point of view, not just a theoretical point of view. Yeah. So yeah.
Yes. And how long do you work with your students generally? So if it was a novel, for example, is that over a set period of time, or does it vary from student to student?
It varies a bit from student to student, depending on where they are in their project and the size of the project. But generally, it's sort of a minimum of 3 months by the time we work through the whole thing. We do that initial review. I give them notes. They do some work, come back, we talk again. And then at the end, I always talk to them about, publishing options and where to take it from here and that kind of thing.
Well, that's great, so that you help them with that next stage rather than them kind of going, okay, I've got this finished product. Now what do I do? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so how, if anybody was interested in applying with you, I know you don't take many students, but if somebody grabbed your attention and you thought, this is a project I'd love to work on, what's the best way of them applying for your program?
Sure. Well, the thing to do is to go to my website, rhondadouglas.com, and look at that Work With Me tab, and it sort of walks through the process. And if that sounds like something that's appealing, then from the website, they could send me an email.
Lovely. That's fantastic.
Or they could just email me directly. It's just rhondadouglas.com. So.
I like it. So what you've mentioned that you're working on a medical historical novel, is that right? And how's that going for you? Are you still in the first draft phase?
I am still in the first draft phase. I'm 150 pages in as of this week. So that means I'm about halfway there. It's a historical mystery set in 1880s London, and someone is killing suffragists.
Ooh.
And the detective, you've always got to have your amateur detective, is one of Britain's first female surgeons. So that's where the medical stuff, comes in.
And is the female surgeon, is she based on somebody real?
She kind of is, actually, but I think I've now gone so far away from, it was Elizabeth Garrett at the time, which was, one of I think Britain's first surgeon. She actually got her medical degree in France, but she was trained as an apothecary in England and worked under that licensing for a while. So it was based on her originally, but I've now just sort of twisted it in a fictional way so much that I think it's long left. But that's sort of where I started.
Well, she sounds fascinating.
Yeah, she really was.
And I wonder if you could share with us, because I quite often ask my guests, if there's one sort of craft book that you think would be a great book for someone writing their first novel, perhaps, what would be one that you've found really helpful and has helped you progress?
It's so hard to pick one, right? So I would expect that people have said to that question before, people probably go with Anne Lamott, Bird by Bird, because of its emphasis on what she calls the shitty first draft. And I think of it as the ever-evolving draft. But definitely that is, one of the most important pieces of advice, particularly for people working on a book-length work. But I just picked up and have been teaching my students. So I have a monthly membership for writers called the Writers Flow Studio, and we do a class every month on something. And so we just did a class on working to write a compelling page one. And the book is called Hooked by Les Edgerton, who's an American writer. And so it's called Hooked, and it's got a little fish on a hook in the and it's all about making a great start. Like, how do you get that? The book where you pick it up and then you can't put it down because the start is just so delicious. That he gets into all the tactics and techniques for that. It's really great.
Oh, that's a book I need to read now because I'm editing, and in the back of my head is the concept.
So good. Yeah, highly recommend. And I know, in fact, I just sent it to a student who's in Glasgow, so I know you can get it on amazon.co.uk.
Fantastic. Oh, thank you for that. I didn't know that you had a membership scheme. Do you want to?
Yeah, I've got a monthly membership. It's relatively new, but and so I haven't, it hasn't been launched in a big way yet. But I've got about 60 people in there now on a monthly basis. It's called the Writers Flow Studio, and it's really focused on mindset more than anything, right? So writers who have been avoiding their writing, writers who are really anxious about writing, writers who, do a little bit of writing and then stop, and then, and are just sort of struggling with how they're feeling about their writing. I do accompanied writing sessions with them a couple times a week. I have writing prompts. We have a community where we keep one another accountable. So every Monday we're in there talking about, so today, just this morning, before I came on, I was checking in, and one of the folks in England had already posted about, well, that's how last week went, and here are my plans for this week. And, we cheer each other on. And then once a month I do a live masterclass on some issue that gets to writers' mindset. So the last one we did on that was perfectionism, overcoming perfectionism. And this month we are doing procrastination.
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, that'll be really useful. Yeah.
Right.
And can people find out about that at rhondadouglas.com as well?
Yeah, it's if you go to rhondadouglas.com and sign up for one of the free resources there. So I have a guide to do-it-yourself writing retreats, like I mentioned, how I finished my first book. If you sign up for that, then you would be on the mailing list. And when it's launched again this fall, and the doors are open and you can join. And it's not terribly expensive. So it's the kind of thing that you could try and cancel if it didn't work, that kind of thing. So,
okay, cool. Okay, well, that's how. Okay, I'll put a link to that so people know how to get on the waiting list.
Sure, that sounds great.
Well, we're almost out of time, and I just wondered if you have any last little bits or anything, last gem of information or suggestions or advice for any of our listeners out there.
Sure. Well, thanks for this. It's been such a lovely chat. I've really enjoyed it. And I think for anyone, when you're thinking about writing a book, and particularly if you're at that stage of writing your first book, the thing to realize is that it's mostly a mindset. It's about 80% mindset and 20% craft. The craft you can get better at after you finish that first draft. But I think it was Jodi Picoult who said you can't edit a blank page, and so you've got to get that first draft written. So yeah, so that's
true. I use that phrase to hand as well. I always remind myself, just keep going. You've got to get it down.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful, Rhonda. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed our chat, and that's flown in. My goodness.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, it's been lovely. It was really great to chat with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found that helpful and inspirational. Now, don't forget to come on over to Facebook and join my group, Turning Readers into Writers. It is especially for you if you are a beginner writer who is looking to write their first novel. If you join the group, you will also find a free cheat sheet there called 3 Secret Hacks to Write with Consistency. So go to emmadesi.com/turning readers into writers, hit join. Can't wait to see you in there. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.